Hello and welcome to UpFront. I'm your host, Bianca Jade. On this episode, we're joined by Tim Moen, the Libertarian leader for Canada. We're going to be discovering why he chose the Libertarian Party, his thoughts on the legalization of marijuana, and as always, we're taking your questions. So please join in the conversation by using the hashtag UpFront on social media, and I'll do my best to get your questions answered. Thanks so much for joining us. This is UpFront. Welcome to UpFront. As promised, we're now joined by Tim Moen. Tim, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we met before years ago in Fort McMurray, and that's where you were a fireman there. Just take me back to even before that in your personal career, why you chose Libertarian Party. But first, where did you grow up?
So I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta, just north of Grand Prairie, literally in the middle of nowhere is what it felt like when I was growing up. But, I learned the value of hard work, of community, of things like, the idea that firearms are a tool for defense against wild animals and that sort of thing. And so I think that the ideas of liberty were probably instilled in me just by virtue of where I grew up and the nature of the type of community I grew up in. Everyone was very hardworking, very self-sufficient, but also very responsible to each other, and we felt obligated to each other as a community. And I thought that was great, and that led me later on, I think, in life to seek out and find like-minded individuals in the Libertarian Party. And
you give back to the community. You're still a fireman. You started your career when?
I started my career very young, right out of high school, really. I spent a year at Bible college, but then I went on to get into emergency services, and I went right into becoming a paramedic, and a little later on got fire training and went to a dual service up in Fort McMurray. But I've been doing this for over 2 decades. I don't want to date myself here, but my whole adult life has been towards serving the community, and I guess specifically trying to counteract forces that destroy people's lives, disease, fire, that sort of thing. And so to me, the transition to politics was almost sort of a natural extension of that. I saw kind of what I view as destructive forces tearing apart the fabric of our nation, and I wanted to step up. That's just, I guess, maybe how I was wired, how I was raised by my parents.
And why, you spoke a little bit about liberty coming into your life at a young age, but why did you choose the Libertarian Party in particular?
Well, I didn't know a lot about the party. I had been involved in learning the philosophy of liberty for probably a decade before I ever really found out about the party or got involved. But, and so I'd been active in kind of propagating these ideas and having discussions with people about them, what I consider big and important ideas. But it wasn't until I actually started doing some film work with environmental activists that would come up to Fort McMurray. Mm-hmm. Every firefighter has a side business, and my side business was doing film production. And I did some work with Neil Young and Daryl Hannah when they came up to Fort McMurray, and I tried to help them tell the story they wanted. But I wanted to make sure that they knew there was another side to the coin, and that the people of Fort McMurray had this kind of environmental consciousness that mm-hmm. never gets told, and that even while they were in town, there was this sustainable, an eco-friendly carnival run off used cooking oil, and it had a solar-powered stage. I thought it would be great for Neil to sing a song on the solar-powered stage, kind of in the heart of dirty oil industry, right? Here's where we're at, and here's where we're going because of industry, because of the wealth, because of the hard work of the people here. And of course, Neil Young didn't see it that way, which was fine, but then he went on to unfairly characterize the community as being kind of genocidal and looking like Hiroshima. And I spoke up about it. I wrote an article about it that went viral, and it caught the attention of a lot of liberty-minded folks that were involved in the party, and they started approaching me to run for Parliament, and I was very hesitant. I didn't want to do this at all. It's never been my ambition to become a politician at all. In fact, I saw that as almost antithetical to what I was trying to put out in the world.
I'm going to hold you right there because we're going to go to a quick break, and we're going to come back, and I want to know how they convinced you. I know you've come up before and said possibly there was the Ron Paul comment, so we'll see why you chose to be the leader and what's the next step. So we'll be coming back in just one moment. Welcome back to UpFront. I'm Bianca Jade, and right now I'm joined by Tim Moen. Please keep the conversation going on social media by using the hashtag UpFront and following us on our different platforms. Now, Tim, you mentioned this right before you left. Why did you decide to take the leadership? You know, you had mentioned before that it was never something that you were striving to do.
Yeah, well, I finally, these people that were trying to convince me to run as a member of Parliament in the 2015 election kept throwing out the name Ron Paul and saying, listen, I know you're hesitant to get involved in politics, but Tim, you can't tell me that Ron Paul didn't bring a lot of people the very message that you're trying to get out, and that wasn't that a good thing. And I couldn't argue with that, and I was a big admirer of Dr. Paul's, and I liked his message, and they were right. And so I made a commitment to run in the 2015 election. Now, this was back in, I believe, 2014 or 2013. So I figured I had a couple of years to get ready.
That was pretty quick turnover for you.
Well, yeah. And so, but 2 days later, our member of Parliament, which at the time was Brian Jean, resigned. And so we were thrown immediately into a by-election. So I had no clue about how to get the paperwork filed, about how to run for Parliament, about how the process even worked. And so, I assembled a team of people from across the country who were interested in helping out in this by-election. And there was some young people involved, and we came up with all these slogans. And of course, the one that put me on the map was a slogan that said, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. And that particular slogan went viral. It got retweeted, hundreds of thousands of times.
We even had a tweet come in about the exact same thing.
Yeah, and it got me on Fox News and CNN, and This Hour has 22 Minutes made fun of me. And so before I knew it, I was kind of thrust into the international spotlight, and riding that kind of wave of popularity, I was nominated for leader of the party. It just was a series of events, I guess, that happened coincidentally in short order, that led to me going from being totally opposed to getting involved in politics to suddenly essentially running for Prime Minister in very short order.
Now, when you have the Libertarian Party, and you've already spoken about it, it spoke to you, you mentioned before small government. When people hear that, what does that mean to you, small government?
Right, so our conception of government is that it is an institution that has a monopoly on and a mandate to use force. And so it's basically a hammer, and it's very good at pounding nails. And the types of nails that need to be pounded by government are real crimes against our own liberties. So, rape, assault, murder, theft. Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And when that happens, government needs to step in and protect us. And government ought to be limited to that role. And if it's not limited to that role, then it's doing the very things against us that it's supposed to be protecting us from. So if the tax rate is too high, it's taking from us without consent. If
I was going to pause you there on the tax rate, because we did have one question come in about the tax rate, and you guys had put forward your simplified tax when you were running last time. So you said 15% flat tax. Can you explain that more?
Yeah, so the idea is that, we think that it's fair that everyone pays the same percentage of tax rate. We wanted to make it simplified because we don't think it should take weeks or months or even hours to fill out your tax form. It should simply be a few clicks. This is how much I made, this is how much I owe. And, there should be a few exceptions, like, seniors, disabled, students, that sort of thing should not have to pay tax on, the first, I think, $20,000 or $30,000 worth of their earnings. But, other than that, it should be very simple. And it's a huge regulatory burden. It costs businesses and individuals a lot of time to prepare their taxes and report to government and try to make sure they're not paying more than their fair share. And so our plan was to simply decrease that regulatory burden and allow people more time to actually be productive, to go out and continue to make more money and bring in more wealth for their family and for their community. And so that was kind of what our tax rate was born on. And we did the math, and we talked to economists who said that a lower flat tax rate actually results in it's revenue neutral. In other words, we can still have the same amount of money coming into the government because the economy is going full tilt boogie, right? It's basically on steroids. It's unrestricted, and it can actually generate more wealth, and so you can actually get more or the same amount of revenue with a lower tax rate. So you don't need to tax people that high, and in fact, taxing people highly stifles the economy and stifles the amount of overall money available to the government as well.
Now you spoke a little bit there about your actual role, and you were thrown in this
Sure.
in this whole situation. And coming up in just a short moment, we're going to be talking to you a little bit more. I want to hear about your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana. That was some questions that were coming in. And the Princess and Prince of Pot, I know you've come out publicly and said how you feel about the Liberal Party and what they're doing. So we'll get to that in just 2 seconds. So we have more with Tim Owen coming up after the break. Have you always wanted to live in St. Albert but are curious if it's only for the elite? Well, we break down that stigma after the break. Welcome back to UpFront. I'm your host, Bianca Jade. We're joined by the Libertarian leader for the Canadian Party Tim Moen. So Tim, we've had a wonderful opportunity just to talk a few seconds ago about your thoughts about why you chose the Libertarian Party. You've been in the news, you've come out quite vocal about your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana. So let's start there. You spoke a little second ago about criminal justice platform. For you guys, why are the Liberals not the right ones for the job?
Well, we see, it's hard to see much difference for myself really between the Conservative and the Liberal Party when it comes to the issue of cannabis. They both want to regulate it very intensely, right? And this is the wrong approach to take with it. On top of being an activist for liberty and saying, well, who has a right to tell you what you can and can't put into your own body? Do you own your body or not? There is a public safety aspect to that I'm concerned about as essentially a public safety official, as a guy who has been on the front lines dealing with the effects of prohibition as a firefighter and a paramedic. As a paramedic, I see deal with fentanyl overdoses on a regular basis. As a firefighter, we see illegal grow ops and different things causing all sorts of problems. And so clearly driving these activities into the shadows out of the sunlight is a real problem. And so, we saw, for example, in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, in the Surrey area, we have a fire chief there that is very interested in enforcing prohibition. I testified and rebutted his testimony in a constitutional challenge, Allard versus Canada, in which he was talking about how legal grow ops are a fire hazard, for example. And this is an example of an area where legalization can really improve public safety, because his own data showed that while there was a high percentage of these grow ops that violated fire codes, 100% of these grow ops came into compliance with the codes after inspection. So in other words, they went from being unsafe to safe because they were able to interface with public safety officials. So as a public safety official, I want to be able to go in and educate people on how to keep their kitchen safe, on how to keep their electrical appliances safe, but also in the future, I'd like to be able to educate them on how to keep their grow ops safe, so that it doesn't threaten their lives and the lives of their neighbors, as they're engaging in these activities. I'd prefer to see them in the sunlight rather than hiding in the shadows where we'll never find out about them until we're there fighting that fire.
You've come out and spoken quite publicly about the Emerys, the Princess and Princess of Pot. We'll just go back a little bit since they were arrested, which was a little while ago, and now with them back in Vancouver. Just give us a bit of a backstory about your relationship with them and why you're so passionate about speaking out.
Well, I've met Mark a couple times, and my relationship has really just been one from afar. I don't consume cannabis myself. I'm not all that passionate necessarily about cannabis. I'm very passionate about liberty. But Mark's tireless kind of activism here has kind of been inspiring to me, and it's a shame to see what the government is doing. So here we have coordinated raids, Mark and Jody Emery essentially having their kneecaps busted in a mob-like kind of enforcement tactic, and the message seems to be, listen, we're going to break your kneecaps, we're going to shut down your business, we're going to ruin your lives unless you fall under our legalization regime. And of course, Justin Trudeau's CFO for his campaign is a co-founder of Tweed Marijuana. It's one of the few companies that has a license to commercially distribute it. So it seems like the message is, if you're a small or medium-sized business, we're going to destroy your lives. But if you're connected to us, and then we'll give you a license basically to print money. And Mark and Jody Emery are suffering the brunt of this. Their lives are in tatters right now, and in fact they face life imprisonment for doing something that hasn't harmed anyone. It's all by consenting adults, and by, you know, the stuff is grown by people who are trying to follow the rules and want to follow the rules and are following all the guidelines that are given to them. And so it's a real crying shame to see, because this type of legalization regime will simply result in a continued black market. We'll continue to see the same public safety hazards emerge that we have. Because why would people want to pay such a high price for such a low quality product when they can just go to their neighbor who's growing it, throwing their seeds in the dirt? It's so easy to grow. So the bar to getting access to the legal market has to be low enough to eliminate the black market.
Now, she came out publicly and said this week she's going to return to being a broke activist once again. Yeah. Would you bring her into the Libertarian Party? You know, I put out an open invite to Jody Emery. When she announced she was going to run for the Liberal Party, I sent out an open invite. I tweeted out a video pleading with her to come over to our party. She was a Ron Paul fan. I don't know what she was doing with those guys over there. They're proven authoritarians time and again. And so, you know, their idea was, look, that's our one issue, right? And if we can just get this one issue and the Liberals look like they have the best chance of legalizing it, then the dominoes will fall. But I think we've seen the consequence of that if you're willing to sacrifice all these other principles, you're going to continue to do it. And so, you know, yeah, of course, Jody Emery, if you're watching this, join the Libertarian Party of Canada. We'll welcome you with open arms. We're all broke activists too, by the way. We're going to get to that in just a few seconds here. I've got more questions to ask you, not just legalization of marijuana. You want other things legalized as well. So we'll get to that in just a short moment with Tim Owen, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. He's saying goodbye to St. Albert City Council, but not to politics. What's in store for Nolan Kraus? All that and more after this short commercial break. Welcome back. I'm Bianca Jade, and this is UpFront. We're speaking to Tim Moen, and right now we're talking about the voice of liberty. Now, you've been on a mission to share that with Canadians. How's that mission been going? You know, it's been going, there's mixed reviews, right? So we had the most successful year in our party's 43-year history in 2015. So, you know, that is something to celebrate. And we're seeing the word libertarian being used more and more in public discourse. You know, Brian Jean, in his first public interview after winning leadership of the Wild Rose, described himself as a libertarian. We now see, you know, the front runner for the Conservative Party, Maxime Bernier, being described as a libertarian. And we see a lot of these candidates outright taking our policy ideas, our platform. And to me, that is a win. That means that we're having an effect on culture, and that eventually, regardless of whether the Libertarian Party forms government, that will pay off in terms of the political market demanding more liberty-oriented platforms. Is that the point where you ask those people to join your party, or that you inspire your party to follow those people, or do you continue along on your own course? Well, I think it's important that there's a principled party out there that is willing to sacrifice,
even getting votes and getting popularity in order to get out a principled message. And we're seeing that the fruits of that pay off. You know, I think it's important to put pressure on these other political parties, the ones that are more concerned about getting votes and reflecting culture and entrenching culture. It's important to shift culture if we want to see them shift. I mean, they're not going to shift unless culture shifts.
How hard is that as a leader of a party? You know, the libertarian message is one way. Is it difficult to, as you try to become more trending or to get more members, to basically stay on track and make sure that you're remaining to your values?
It definitely is tempting, right? Because there's always a temptation to soften your message, to pander, to tell people what they want to hear, because that's the easy thing. And it feels good to stand in front of an audience and tell them the thing they want to hear and then get a round of applause from them. I think we saw that down south in the American election. It seemed like Donald Trump was continually starting a sentence, not even knowing how it was going to end, and then noticing what the crowd was responding to and kind of adjusting his speech and his platform policies on the fly based on what kind of applause he was getting. And so I can understand the temptation to do that. But you know, I wear a replica of the Lord of the Rings Ring of Power on my finger, in part to remind me of my marriage vows, but also to remind me that power corrupts, and that's continually seeking to use power to fix all the problems in the world is playing a dangerous game.
Well, let's just pause you there. So when you mentioned that, one of the questions that we had come in was they were curious why you're choosing a federal election. Sure. Why you don't want to stay in your own municipality. And they were saying, you know, if you're thinking big government, no. You used to say in your own words, power corrupts. Why do you think that was the platform that was best to get your message out?
Well, it was the opportunity that presented itself to me at the time. And it is also the biggest platform we could have, right? It's a message that then gets out coast to coast. And so, you know, I think that what we have to do in order to see the type of government and the type of society I'd prefer to see emerge, what has to happen is culture has to shift. And if culture doesn't shift, we don't get that government. It doesn't matter who gets elected. And so, you know, changing one heart and mind at a time is the most important thing we can do. It's hard work, it's thankless work, but it's the most important work we can do. And there's research that shows that when 10% of a population adopts an unshakable belief, whether that's abolition of slavery, civil rights, women's suffrage, then the majority of the population adopts that same belief system. They sort of come along. So I think that we kind of have a tactical advantage. It'll take a little bit long. We'll have to put more investment in up front. But down the road, I think that our efforts will pay off. And that's why I do what I do, I guess.
You know, you mentioned there a few minutes ago about Mad Max
Sure.
Bernier, about his thoughts and his philosophies. I know you both have come out together and you have very similar thoughts on the CBC and on supply management. What for you makes you feel like he's a libertarian?
Well, I mean, I've met Max. You know, I consider him a friend, and I encouraged him to run for leadership of the CPC before the leadership race started. I was glad to see him enter the race, and I hope he wins. And so just in personal conversations with him, you know, I think that he's very similar to Ron Paul, very similar to myself, shares the same types of principles and understanding of systems and economies. And so I think it's very encouraging. And of course, you know, running for a status quo party, he has got to be more restrained, and he's got to kind of reflect what the membership want and what Canadians at large want when it comes to the general election. And you know, my job, as I see it, is to make it as easy as possible for Canadians to accept that message. And if they accept it in Maxime Bernier, and because of that we get a smaller government that allows us more flourishing and more freedom, well then that's a win for me and my kids and my grandkids eventually. And that's why I do this. And so it doesn't necessarily matter if I become Prime Minister or someone else with the same set of principles that do. It's the ideas that matter. It's the system that matters, and that's why I do this, right?
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best as you continue on this Voice of Liberty, and we hope to have you again on soon. Thank you for joining us for this episode of UpFront, and if you want to continue on the conversation, please join us on social media.